Hello, I'm Lucy Gray. This is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing, bringing you up to date with all you need to know on the US-Israel war with Iran. Let's start with some of today's key developments. Iranian news agencies are reporting that US missiles have struck close to the Gulf island of Qeshm in the Strait of Hormuz. Targets were not named, but the island is said to have tunnels storing anti-ship missiles, mines, and other munitions. This latest development follows waves of attacks in the past several days by both the US and Iran, with Tehran launching strikes on US military bases in neighbouring Gulf states and Washington continuing to hit Iranian targets. So is the respite over for oil prices? Crude is at its highest in a month as attacks on shipping, sea traffic in the Strait of Hormuz all but grind to a halt. A former White House energy advisor tells the BBC it's heading back towards $100 a barrel. Despite Pakistan, which is a leading mediator in the Iran-US war, urging both sides to halt current hostilities and return to negotiations, Iran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, has warned that a deal only has meaning when its clauses are valid and being implemented. Iranian news agencies are reporting that US missiles have struck close to the Gulf island of Qeshm. Earlier, Pakistan, a leading mediator in the Iran-US war, urged the adversaries to halt current hostilities and return to negotiations. For the moment, neither side is observing to the Memorandum of Understanding signed a month ago designed to halt the conflict. Qeshm is near the Strait of Hormuz. Targets were not named, but the island is said to have tunnels storing anti-ship missiles, mines and other munitions. In a previous wave of strikes, US Central Command said it had hit dozens of targets near the Strait of Hormuz as it tries to stop Iran from being able to threaten cargo ships using the vital shipping lane. Iranian state television said Iran had fired missiles and drones at targets in Kuwait, Bahrain and Jordan. Iran has threatened to block further trading routes in the region. Well, with me now is our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Are these strikes going to achieve anything, Jeremy?
Well, Donald Trump seems to think that they will be enough. If he believes if you use enough force, you can get Iran back to the negotiating table where it will make concessions. I have to say, based on everything that's happened, there is no evidence that that will happen. America has a seemingly infinite capacity to do massive damage to Iran, physical damage. But it doesn't have the capacity, it appears, to force Iran to capitulate, to make the concessions that Donald Trump feels are necessary. And one thing that Iran is absolutely certain is that it will not relinquish what it believes are its rights over control of navigation through this very strategic Strait of Hormuz. And the reason why one of the major reasons why the negotiations have run into the sand is that the Americans have been encouraging shipping to take a route that goes via the Omani coast, in other words, the other side of the strait. And Iran is saying ships have to go through a route along their coast. Now, it would be possible if the Iranians said, look, we will stop attacking shipping, and if the Americans said, okay, we will stop encouraging shipping to go along the Omani side, it might be possible to have a bit of a pause and negotiations to start again. It's interesting that neither side has said, right, we're pulling out. It's quite possible they will begin again. I've been speaking to people involved in the mediation process who say a lot of what is happening is smoke, that they will get back to it. However, clearly, the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes. And it means that there is increasingly heavy lift, as one of these mediators said to me, to try to get them to the table and talking.
Can you just talk us through some of these waves of attacks that we've been seeing?
Yeah, I think we might have a map where we can look at some of these things. And what we're seeing, though, is that the pattern of strikes, as you see, are very much near the Strait of Hormuz. Bandar Abbas, which is the big port, Iranian port facing it. Now that's been hit, and that of course is a major center. But there have been other strikes as well, which have been along the coastal area. And while they have got a little bit closer once or twice to Tehran, what they have not started to do, the Americans have not started to do again, is to hit targets inside Tehran, and also Donald Trump, and of course, he makes loads of threats, doesn't always go through with them, has said that they will move on to attacking petrochemical plants and bridges and infrastructure.
They've hit a tanker recently, haven't they, as well?
So the fact is this is escalating, but slowly. There is talk of, I wouldn't read anything into it particularly, but it's worth mentioning, of the Americans having some kind of ground operation, trying to seize a bit of territory. They're not in a position to do that politically, militarily either, frankly, at the moment. They're not, I think, in a state of preparation to do that. And that's when they start getting into what people in America call forever wars, which Donald Trump, of course, said that he would have no part of, and which have been politically very costly to some of his predecessors.
And can you just talk us through the states, the areas that Iran has been targeting as well?
Well, Iran's been hitting American bases in Gulf countries. It's been hitting bases in the UAE, you can see there on the map, Bahrain, Kuwait. They've also hit Jordan. It's not clear exactly how much damage that they've managed to do with these attacks. But again, that's Jordan up there, and it's quite collaborated. Prince Hassan base, which I've been to quite a few times, is a massive desert air base. It is not clear exactly what damage they're doing, if anything, but again, it speaks to the idea that they are calibrating these attacks. In other words, in the same way that the Americans aren't hitting big targets in Tehran, the Iranians are not going for those targets in Gulf countries that they were hitting during the full-on war in March, when they were hitting oil installations, gas. There was talk of them going after desalination plants, causing a lot of damage. They are not doing that right now. It doesn't mean to say they couldn't do it in the future if they wanted to.
OK, stay with us, Jeremy, because I want to hear now from Sally Nabil, our correspondent, our BBC Arabic correspondent. She can talk us through the impact of these latest strikes on the region.
It's getting tense once more in the region after a few weeks of calmness since the US and Iran signed the Memorandum of Understanding last month, which ushered in a ceasefire. But now fears are growing that we are back to a full-scale war. Over the past few days, the US has bombarded Iran heavily. As has been the pattern since the beginning of the war back in February, Iran always responds by targeting the oil-rich Gulf monarchies. The army in Kuwait said that they have intercepted a few drone attacks, and in Bahrain, the Ministry of Interior has asked its citizens to stay calm and head to a safe place. A couple of days ago, 2 UAE oil tankers were targeted by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Oman. The Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, has condemned this escalation and called upon the international community and the UN Security Council to take decisive steps to stop what it called the recurrent and serious Iranian aggression. In the Strait of Hormuz, the situation is not any better because the US has reinstated its naval blockade, and now Iran's Revolutionary Guards are threatening to stop all energy exports from the Middle East. Since the beginning of the war, Iran has been very keen on shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, putting pressure on global energy markets and sending prices up. And so far, there is no sign that any party is backing off.
Sally Nabil. So days of US and Iran trading strikes means oil prices remain at their highest in around 5 weeks. Here's our business correspondent, Michelle Fleury from New York.
President Trump has spent months trying to force Iran to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier this week, he announced plans for a US naval blockade of Iran and a 20% fee on ships passing through the waterway. He later dropped the fee, but traffic through the strait remains badly disrupted, and oil prices are climbing. Brent crude is now back above $80 a barrel. And energy analyst Bob McNally warns if the shutdown drags on, prices could climb even higher.
It depends on just how long Hormuz is reshut. And if we go another month or two without Hormuz flows being restored, the price will have to go much higher into the $100 range.
So far, the global economy has proved surprisingly resilient, but McNally says that could change. Oil inventories are falling, and China, well, it's buying more crude again. If Hormuz remains constrained, he says oil prices are likely headed higher.
This rekindled fighting is just a month after the signing of a preliminary deal that aimed to end the conflict. Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson said Islamabad would continue to encourage all sides to end violence and resume technical level talks. But Iran's top negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, has warned that a deal only has meaning when its clauses are valid and being implemented. President Trump recently threatened to hit Iranian power plants and bridges unless Tehran returned to the negotiating table. Let's hear some more of President Trump's recent comments about mounting pressure on Iran.
We're doing really well with Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not happy right now. Should have been done 47 years ago. Should have been done at least during the 47-year period. And it wasn't. Other presidents didn't do what was right. They should have done it a long time ago. It would have been much easier. And they want to settle so badly. They don't like what we're doing. And they do want to settle. We'll find out whether or not we settle with them or we just finish it off.
Well, our Washington correspondent Daniel Bush joins me, as well as BBC Persian's Sayavash Ardalan. And Daniel, President Trump's increasingly frustrated, isn't he, that this deal hasn't yet been done?
That's right. Increasing frustration from President Trump, who began this war a couple of months ago thinking that it could end quickly. He could achieve some of his stated aims of getting Iran to drop its nuclear weapon ambitions and other things, support for proxy groups. None of that has come to pass yet. And we're seeing a president increasingly frustrated and, frankly, increasingly under pressure from multiple different points to find a resolution. From Republicans here at home in the United States, who see an unpopular war in the polls and would like the president to focus on the economy ahead of the midterms. From Gulf regional allies, I was traveling with Secretary of State Rubio there just a couple of weeks ago, and behind the scenes, a lot of Gulf allies expressing concern, as we just heard, about the impacts of this war. And yet President Trump does not seem to have an off-ramp here. But while he is sort of threatening increased attacks, and we've seen an uptick in attacks from the U.S., behind the scenes, America is looking for ways to get Iran back to the negotiating table. In speaking with White House sources, behind the scenes, they are looking for sort of indirect ways. They are in touch with the Qataris, with the Omanis, with other key mediators, interlocutors, to see if there is a way that they can get Iran back to the negotiating table. So those indirect talks are continuing, although we haven't seen a sort of formal resumption of the negotiations in some time. But it remains to be seen how exactly the U.S. can get Tehran back to the negotiating table. And right now they've been unable to do that.
And Sayavash, to you, are Iran's negotiators and the top leadership in Tehran on the same page? Or are you seeing a difference in messaging?
I think they're pretty much on the same page. There might be differences of opinion over tactics, but I think Iran has chosen to eventually reach an agreement with the United States. I think that's been a decision that's been taken by an institution called the High National Security Council. All these decisions are made on a consensual basis. There's a lot of consensus building involved, and then stamp approved by the supreme leader. There might be sometimes contradictory statements coming out, one authority contradicting the other, but the chief negotiator from Iran, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, yesterday he issued a very lengthy communique trying to appease both constituencies within the regime loyalist base, hardliners who reject any kind of agreement or any kind of negotiations with the U.S. outright, and on the other hand, trying to appease those who eventually want to see a resolution to this conflict, saying that war and negotiations are two instruments in our toolbox, and we will use whatever it takes to advance our national interest. So you might sometimes hear rumblings or criticisms from the very hard-line base of the regime, which are seen more out on the streets, putting pressure on politicians not to go soft in their dealings with the U.S., especially given that the head of the state TV, Iran's government-sanctioned state TV, is a hardline himself. But I think within the very highest echelons of decision-making in the Revolutionary Guards and in the government, there is consensus over the fact that Iran eventually needs to reach an agreement with the U.S. in terms of sanctions removal, and of course, in terms of, and there's no difference on that, in terms of consolidating and establishing Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sayavash Adlan and Daniel Bush, for us there in Washington. So no let-up with the renewed airstrikes by either Washington or Tehran, and no solution in sight for oil shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Let's return to our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, to talk us through the big picture. We had a memorandum of understanding, Jeremy, but there's not really much understanding between the two sides, is there? And meanwhile, the global impact of this continues.
Yeah, the thing about the Memorandum of Understanding was it wasn't a full-blown peace negotiation. What it was a set of points which they would agree or polish to try to get them to deal with the main. It was like a potential agenda when they got into some serious talks about big issues like Iran's nuclear program, for example, which was, for Donald Trump, a major reason for the war in the first place. But what's happened is that those points have used some very ambiguous language. So there's the point that deals with navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you can read it. It says something like Iran makes the arrangements. Iran takes that as meaning, well, we're in charge. America doesn't. I'm simplifying here, of course.
But America agreed to that.
Well, they signed up, and there's zero trust on either side. They don't trust each other. The Iranians, I think, suspect that the whole idea of the MOU, which came laden with incentives like lifting or waiving sanctions for the time being, possibly unfreezing assets, there was money attached to it. The Americans seem to think that that might be the thing that would keep the Iranians interested in the whole process. But actually, for them, this principle of controlling navigation through the Strait of Hormuz and therefore keeping a chokehold on the world economy. Brilliant weapon as far as they're concerned. And they certainly do not want to give it up. And they're worried that the Americans might try and use the MOU to weaken that or remove that. So that's why they're taking a hard line.
And President Trump, of course, in a hurry. He's thinking about the elections, isn't he? He wants to get this done, and yet this impasse continues.
He's in a bind, frankly, because this was an ill-conceived war that they went into without thinking through a plan B, C, D, or E. If their initial idea, Netanyahu of Israel and Trump of America's initial idea, which was that there would be regime change once they killed the supreme leader, which they did on day one, well, that didn't happen. So they're in a situation now where they are left with new leaders of the old regime. The regime is still there. It has new leaders who, unlike the former supreme leader, who was nearly 90 years old and very cautious, these are younger men who believe that using force can help them. And they are prepared to take a tough line. And they also believe they're in an existential struggle. So for all those reasons, they have no desire, and they're highly ideological, no desire whatever, to capitulate to the demands of the Americans.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeremy Bowen, our international editor. Whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.